I'm very happy to see you again after we have seen you here in exactly the same room where I am now for a 2 days seminar and for an evening presentation also by your side. And it is well remembered, and many of the people who will be looking at this Zoom will be glad to see you again. I would now like to present you in a more formal way. Professor Thulie Madonsela has a law degree from the University of Swaziland and Witwatersrand. Later, she was also awarded a doctor in law at the University of Stellenbosch. She had in her professional career one very important appointment, that is the one of Public Protector of South Africa that she held for 7 years. Very recently, she was appointed to the UN Scientific Advisory Board and also chairperson of the Cities Alliance. What you're now doing is you're teaching in your University of Stellenbosch, and you're the director of the Center for Social Justice in the Faculty of Law at Stellenbosch University and Law Trust Research Chair Professor of Law and Social Justice Studies, and a member also of the African Academy of Sciences. I think I have some of the most important, but still only a few of the interesting things that mark your career. Now, we have been in contact with you, and we've asked to do such a conference over video for a number of reasons. The initial point of departure was the South African initiative taken beginning of January to bring the case of Israel's attack and activities in Gaza as a possible case for genocide to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. This procedure has now taken its course. The court in The Hague has already ordered an immediate ceasefire, and Israel has until now ignored these orders. What we would like to do is with you to give a sort of context to this initiative of South Africa. One of the contexts that came to both of our minds is the question of the change of international order on a worldwide scale. In recent years, a new grouping has emerged that calls itself the Global South. What came before was the grouping of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, to which later on South Africa also joined. And in recent times, about half a year ago, South Africa has also promoted an enlargement of the BRICS with a number of additional countries. There were something like 38 applications, and 6 states have been asked to join this new grouping, the BRICS. This process is still ongoing. This has, after all, worldwide caused many comments and reflections. One also has to say that perhaps the expression global south has been widely misunderstood because in one question, of course, we could ask what is Russia or even China doing in a grouping like this? But this is something for discussion. The immediate question is, what is South Africa's intention and role in this context? And what is the African context for the wider changes on the international scene? What I can say, what we now experience daily, is a growing global disorder and a global lack of ideas of what we can actually do. In fact, there would today be probably no person who could say what will happen to us in the world in the next 6 months. And that is where we all are together, and we'll have to find how to encounter this new situation. I would stop here and ask you, Professor, first to introduce yourself perhaps with points that you would like to make, and particularly to talk to us about the role you have had as public protector in South Africa. And from there, we will then go on to the other topics.
Thank you, Ambassador Lennkh. It's a privilege to join this platform once again and to share some thoughts on South Africa, particularly making sense of South Africa's ICJ initiative and present international role. I have fond memories of being in Austria. What you wouldn't know is that besides having been a participant in a previous or two previous sessions of the Bruno Kreisky Forum, I also have been there for the Salzburg lecture, and also coincidentally, I got funded by an organization headed by Beas Nodier, whose funds came from various religious communities in Europe, including Austria. I'm currently working at the Center for Social Justice at Stellenbosch University, where I am a director and also occupying a research chair in social justice. The center undertakes research in the area of social justice, where we also design innovative policy tools and provide training to various stakeholders in business, government, and the judicial system to mainstream social justice. Prior to that, I've had a lifelong journey in pursuit of justice as a human rights seeker. You know, people talk about being a spiritual seeker. I would say I've been a justice seeker for as long as I can remember. Before even getting into my teens, I was already concerned about justice for me, a little narcissistic, you may say. I worried that as a girl, I was made to do all of the house chores, whilst my brother went to play soccer. And then you can say that that stage of my justice consciousness was justice for me, a narcissistic sort of phase of justice. A few years later, I started to notice that women were being discriminated, doing all the work. If you've been to rural areas of Soweto, you would see young women in particular who are new brides being forced to do all the work, but also not being regarded as joint owners of the home. If there's a dispute between the husband and wife, the woman is chased away. I saw this happening to my own mom. And later, I saw under the Black Administration Act, a lot of women being forced to leave their homes because the law, having been distorted by interpreting customary law through Roman Dutch law, disinherited women and dispossessed them, and relatives could then take over the family estate. So for me, that was my phase of justice as just us. It was coupled with noticing apartheid, how it treated Black people as subhumans, dispossessing them of land, and also preventing them from occupying certain jobs, regardless of how intelligent or competent a person would be. From that stage, I also noticed the working class was also not remunerated fairly. That was my justice is just us phase. I wasn't concerned about white people in my country, people with disability, or foreigners. I wasn't concerned about Europe until stage 3 of my justice consciousness, where I realized that justice had to be justice for all. And that consciousness came from studying human rights as a course at university and studying sociology as a course that made me empathize with fellow human beings across the globe. From that phase, when I then got involved in drafting the Constitution, I was still involved in justice for all, but my role as public protector, where I had to be the head of an institution that is similar to the ombudsman in Austria and various parts of Europe. In fact, it's an idea borrowed from Sweden. I had to work with my colleagues to help people to vindicate their rights. And I came there thinking that my job and my team's job was to give people a voice. But eventually I realized as public protector that people do have a voice. They just need to have that voice listened to, channeled, and they need recourse when things have gone wrong. But the public protector has more powers than an average ombudsman in that not only do you investigate and recommend action, if you choose to investigate and order action to be taken as public protector, you are empowered by the Constitution to do so. Hence, for example, when I investigated the theft of public resources to upgrade the president's home in Kandla, that was President Zuma, I was able to use the powers of the public protector to order a return of some of that money. Not a lot of it, but a return of that, and also order the further investigations to look at whether there were no corrupt deals, in that some of the work done at his home was done privately, but there seemed to be no evidence that private payments were made to the service providers, who were the same service providers that were doing work on the renovations in the president's home using public funds. I also used the powers of the public protector to order an investigation into alleged state capture. Because I couldn't conclude that investigation, we then ordered a judicial commission of inquiry, which took place under the leadership of Justice Zondo, who's currently the Chief Justice, and it uncovered a whole lot of shenanigans that had taken place, which were basically corrupt, but more insidious than normal corruption, in that the people involved were controlling who gets appointed in government, who gets state contracts, but also what policies government adopted. And they even also started to interfere with the judicial system. So that was my phase 3 of my relationship with justice. From there, I went to Harvard, and in Harvard, I started realizing that actually it's it's all about justice, which started during my term as publicator to realize that everything we do is about justice. Even corruption is about justice. And once I was in Harvard, I got into stage 5, which is all for justice. And that's where that segues very nicely into the issue of the global South and global North relations. The global South and global North relationship is a complex one that is steeped in a history that has included colonialism, collaboration, interdependence. But as we stand now, corruption, which includes illicit capital outflows, as reflected in the Mbeki report, and a yearning for shared prosperity in the context of asymmetrical trade relations among many factors, this is fueling a trust deficit that threatens the relationship between the global North and the global South. In this case, that would be countries like South Africa, India, China, and various countries in Southern America. In fact, the whole of Africa would be regarded as a global South, including Egypt and Morocco. So because of this love relationship that is beset with challenges around equality, around fair trade, and a solid partnership where there's no senior partner and junior partner, Africa has begun to look east for other partnerships. It has also started to look at BRICS, which, as you indicated, is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa was the first of the new partners to join that relationship. It's really just about democratizing trade. If the way I see it, it is all a quest to democratize trade. Africa is also looking to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement as something that could rebalance the trade relations between itself and other continents. In this case, Africa is in a very difficult situation because whether it trades with the North, which is typically America and Europe, or it trades with the rest of the South, which would be India, China, Brazil, etc. There's a difficulty in that Africa being the last to be decolonized, it is behind in terms of development. And although Africa as a continent yields much of what the world needs in terms of minerals, and particularly minerals, which are needed for technologies and other industrial needs, Africa is not really reaping equitably the fruits of these resources. And perhaps Africa wanting to be part of BRICS and still wanting a good relationship with Europe, with the European Union, and a good relationship with America using AGOA, it is trying to rebalance power where it doesn't find itself having the others determining the terms of trade. It's really all about searching for fair trade. This relationship is also impaired by human rights, which takes me to the next point, which is South Africa's ICJ application. How do we make sense of this? When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, or shortly before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, Eleanor Roosevelt, who led this process, said the following, I quote, "Where after all do universal human rights begin? in small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. Close quotes. The truth is, the Western world has been very good in upholding human rights at home. And we must applaud that. But where difficulty is experienced from the point of view of those in the global South is ambivalence when it comes to human rights protection beyond Europe, beyond America. We know about African leaders that have been assassinated over time, not because they were violating human rights, but because they were standing in the interests of the global North. And I don't want to go into that history, but more recently, we get into Israel. Israel was gifted by the United Kingdom, Palestine, through the Balfour Declaration. But the terms of the Balfour Declaration were very clear that this should not compromise the rights and interests of non-Jews. And at that stage, those were the majority. Many years later, we're still dealing with multiple United Nations resolutions asking Israel to respect the human rights of Palestinians. And at some stage, the United Nations made a resolution requiring a two-state solution. And the boundaries were drawn in 1967, and that seems to make sense. But since then, Israel has been encroaching into Palestinian territory against United Nations decisions. It's an open secret that Israel is increasingly planting settlers, Jewish settlers, inside territories that it knows very well belong to Palestine. And then we had the Gaza Strip, which is regarded as an open prison. The atrocities that have been experienced in the West Bank, in Gaza, and all other occupied territories are documented in various international reports. Even Judge Goldstein documented some of these, although eventually, out of pressure from the Zionist movement, he recanted some of his findings. But other UN agencies have not recanted their findings on Israel's violations. But I must say what happened on October 7, 2023, transcended the boundaries of armed resistance against an occupying force, because Hamas attacked civilians. 1,200 people were killed, 900 of them were civilians. We know now that some of them were killed by friendly fire by Israeli forces, but we must accept that but for the attack by Hamas on those civilians, nobody would have died. And therefore, no reasonable person would say what happened on October 7 was not atrocious. But what has happened since then? What has happened since then is that Israel, which is a signatory together with South Africa to the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, has been doing exactly the things that the Genocide Convention says should not be done. Article 1 of the Genocide Convention says, the preamble says, having considered the declaration made by the General Assembly of the United Nations in Resolution 96-1, dated 11 December 1946, that genocide is a crime under international law, contrary to the spirit and aims of the United Nations, and condemned by the civilized world, recognizing that all periods of history, genocide has inflicted great losses on humanity, and being convinced that in order to liberate mankind from such an odious scourge, international cooperation is required. So South Africa is coming in there from the point of view of, number one, being a signatory to the Genocide Convention, but also from the point of view of international cooperation. But I must also indicate that during the struggle, those of us who were in the struggle under the ANC ambit, the ANC and the PLO were openly in a friendly relationship. And therefore, the relationship between South Africa and Palestine has remained solid for years, such that when Mandela came out of jail, one of the first places he visited was Gaza. And Bishop Tutu also, together with Mandela, issued various statements asking Israel to respect international law, to respect the human rights of Palestinians, and to allow a two-state solution to unfold. Now, back to the Genocide Convention and my thoughts on South Africa's ICJ application. Article 1 of the Genocide Convention says the contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law, which they undertake to prevent and to punish. So you must understand here that it doesn't say when you have been egregiously attacked, then you can commit these crimes that I'm about to talk about. So being attacked, self-defense is not a defense to the commitment of the crimes that are prohibited under the Genocide Convention. And what are those crimes? The Genocide Convention says in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in part or in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, so that is A. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And D, forcibly transferring children of the group to another. Now, the ICJ has determined not once, but 3 times that the acts that Israel has undertaken since October 7 can plausibly be interpreted as genocidal, and asked Israel to comply with the Genocide Convention. It is a party that signed the convention without reservations, which means it cannot do the things that the convention says it should not do. And Israel was ordered to make sure that there's no mass killing of people. There's no bodily or mental harm to members of the group. There's no deliberate infliction on the group of conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and measures intended to prevent births within the group. So A to D, it was asked to do. It was also told that its defense that it was not violating the Genocide Convention was not acceptable, that what it was doing at the time was not enough to satisfy the requirements of the Genocide Convention. Now, there's been suggestions that South Africa is doing this because it wants to be a big global player, or that South Africa has been paid by Iran to do this. but no evidence has been provided to that effect. And in any way, whatever reasons or motives are driving South Africa, to me as a human rights activist, it doesn't really matter. I have been friends with the Jewish community. I have been friends with the Palestinian supporting communities, but I've been more friends with the Jewish community. I've been awarded twice, once, an award by the Jewish community, and against wishes of BDS, among others, I've insisted on speaking at Jewish events because I believe that the Jewish community, like every other community, has a right to articulate its views. And in South Africa, anyway, I am grateful for the role that the Jewish community in our country has played in advancing human rights. I'm a patron of the Helen Suzman Foundation, and I'm very proud to be associated with Helen Suzman, who was a single voice in favor of human rights in Parliament, ridiculed for that, but she displayed to us the power of one. And she wasn't the only one. You can mention various people. Like one of my friends was much older than me, was Ben Turok, again from the Jewish community, and currently I'm friends with his son, who is the founder and head of the AIMS, Africa Institute for Mathematical Sciences, Neil Turok. So I have nothing against Jews, but let's face it, as James Patrick Kenny said in the poem, The Cold Within, if none of us steps out to prevent cruelty, then we're feeding the crocodile. We're fully feeding a world that violates human rights. And the flame of life, the flame of democracy, the flame of shared humanity is going to die. And in James Patrick Kenny's poem, The Cold Within, he talks about 6 people trapped by happenstance. And they are there, it's cold, and it's dark. As they watch a fire dying, each one of them has a conversation in their heads. And for one reason or another, they decide they're not going to give the log they have in their hand to revive the fire. In our case, the fire of peace is dying because peace and injustice cannot coexist. He spoke about a disintegrating global order. And one of the reasons the global order is disintegrating is duplicity, where we say the killing of this one person is wrong, and then another person who's killed wantonly, we either say nothing or we say it's okay, it is justified. And in The Cold Within, the first person decides not to give his log because he sees somebody is not from his church. The next one is white. He sees a black person. He decides a black person does not deserve his log. A Christian sees somebody who's not from his denomination and decides they should not get their log. They're not even a Muslim or Baha'i or Hindu. They are fellow Christians, but a different denomination. A poor person sees a rich person and says they can't have the log. The rich person sees a poor person and says they can't have the log. The last person is somebody I call a mercenary. Those people will not give you a cent unless they can claim it back from the revenue services. Looks at these people and thinks, they're not going to pay me back, and keeps his log. And James Patrick Kenny says they did not die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. So for me, what's happening in Palestine and what's happening globally reminds us of our shared humanity. It reminds us that as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. It also reminds me of an African saying that if you want prosperity for a year, plant crops. If you want prosperity for 10 years or so, plant trees. If you want prosperity for 100 years and beyond, invest in people. Between Europe and Africa, between the global South and the global North, we are bound by shared humanity. As they said at the Tolbe Foundation in one leadership event I attended, clouds have no borders. And it's not only clouds that have no borders during our time. The digital space has no borders. Wars have no borders. What happened in the Ukraine, for example, has been felt by everyone, everywhere, insofar as food chains were disrupted. And what's happened in Palestine, we're all going to pay for it in one way or another. And therefore, investing in justice is investing in peace. Because as long as there is injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Madonsela. That was a very good reminder to all of us of where one could stand on, on a position that is irreproachable. I would have nothing really to add, certainly to the second part, when you spoke about the framework in which Israel-Palestine relations has evolved in the recent 6 months. I would like to go back, if you allow, to the second part, this part on Global South and the relation between Europe and Africa in particular. We have noted, I've noted in my own career, have been Austrian Special Envoy to Africa. And one of the objectives for us was, in fact, to improve this relationship. And during a time, it looked as if this could be making a lot of progress. We had a joint summit in Lisbon in 2007 and drafted a common strategy, and common strategies, both sides signed to this on where to go and what would be the underlying values and guidelines, human rights, and so on. And in fact, if you remember the seminar you had been attending here in the Kreisky Forum, was in a way of one part of this joint strategy, that is common values. In 2007, both of us, Africans and Europeans, signed that we have common values. I remember that a number of years later, I think it was in 2014, before another summit, EU and AU, in one of these preparatory sessions, one African ambassador, I think it was the ambassador of Nigeria, said, well, common values. I think we should simply recognize you have your values, we have our values. And all right, that is probably also a good way of stating it, but it would have to be a starting point for a discussion. In fact, the seminar here wanted to be such a starting point, but at one moment of this internal discussions we had here, it was not public, we felt that it was not easy to come together, and much more work would have to be done in order to come to a structured discussion on these joint values or global values. You have said and insisted very much that justice is a centerpiece of this endeavor. And I would fully agree. If you have to encapsulate this in one word, it's justice. When we are talking a lot about good governance, but this all relates to the state of law, to human rights, and to combating corruption and so on. So the question is, again, after we've seen in the recent years, certainly the 3 or 4 years before now, with COVID, migration, and a number of other issues, that we are drifting apart more and more. And on both sides, there seems to be a kind of cluelessness. What can we do now? And I would ask you this question. And what do you think should be done on both sides now?
Ambassador George, I agree with you that the centerpiece should be justice. And as part of that justice is respect for human rights and also anti-corruption. I also agree with you that coming together to restate the relationship, to restate common ground, is a way to start. I do think, though, there needs to be some agreement on understanding of these terms because everyone agrees on good governance. Everyone agrees on anti-corruption, and we all agree on justice. But on how do we give content, there may be slight differences in nuances. For example, in my country, there are people who believe good governance is anti-corruption. And yet the United Nations good governance framework has 8 factors, and equity or equality is one of those factors. So other people would say good governance is fine in a country like South Africa, which is a huge man-made pyramid scheme. Good governance means you leave the pyramid as is. And there are even people who are talking as we're going into the elections about making sure that to attract foreign direct investment, we should make people sign to agree that they would be paid less than the minimum wage. But the countries we're trading with, they want to pay the minimum wage in their own country. They want a social security system, but they're pushing us to do away with our own social security system and to do away with minimum wages. So we need to discuss those things. What does fairness look like to all of us? And what does justice look like to all of us? And corruption. Often we frame corruption as corruption by those in government. As public protector, I found that in that corruption, most of the big scandals, except in Nkandla, involved big companies from the global north. But when again we frame these conversations on corruption, we make it as if corruption is an African disease. That undercuts all of us because then the corrupt companies that come in and corrupt public servants, then do it. But we know that under the OECD, there's a whole instrument on the criminalization of the bribery of foreign public officials because it is known that most corruption is a bilateral crime. So I would say the way forward is a round table to reset this relationship. Because as I said in my original speech, we need each other. Our shared humanity is not decided by us. It's decided by the universe. It's decided by the cosmic forces. Ours, as the late Chief Justice Mohammed said, ours is to decide whether we're going to make our interdependence, our interconnectedness, which makes us interdependent, a burden and a curse, or we're going to make our interconnectedness and interdependence a blessing that we're going to harness for mutual and fair benefit to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me perhaps add one thing. I would agree to all of this. Again, the question is at this moment, where are we going to start? And I think what we should do on both sides is to see how we can create this framework, a round table, for instance. Who is it? Is it the European Union? This is not yet the North. No, we should go beyond that. On the African side, is it the African Union or not quite? Here, there's a lot of work to do. And I would say we are looking to South Africa as an important country in Africa to go ahead also with initiatives in this direction. So we're also looking to you. I think that was an excellent reminder of, yes, where we still have our own introspection to do and where to go ahead. You mentioned the OECD. I've worked for 11 years there as Austrian representative. It's one of the most excellent organizations in simply showing a mirror to us. This is what you're doing. Look at it. And this is what you should do. The other question is then, will people in their own countries follow the heat of the OECD? And I know exactly. I've had my own fights with our own colleagues. Listen, this is not a joke. You have to do something here. Oh, let them talk. So this is where we have to see how we can create not only just a conversation framework, but somehow reference points that are respected by all of us. Anyway, I'm not going to now have a separate lecture here. I think perhaps would you like to say something at the end? I would like to thank you very much for the time you've taken, and we will see that this text of what you have said to us will find a large communication and distribution. Professor, what would you tell us in the end?
Well, firstly, Ambassador, to say thank you for the privilege to share my thoughts. And thank you for all of the good things that Europe and the global North does. We're going through a difficult age right now, but difficult times can either take us to hell or help us to rethink things and move forward better. So it is an inflection point, but like any inflection point, our determined action can determine the future. And I'm convinced that there are good people on both sides and that we can use this as a gift and come out of it better for all of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you.